morning. Good morning again, and thank you for coming to my concert. I'm going to sing 5 songs today. No, you're in the wrong place if you're coming here for concert. I'm not a comedian either. Maybe I should consider. But today, well, the Gay School business is what I'm proud to share with everyone on campus, and our visiting fellow, and Mr. Anil Singh Polaris, and he came to us through a program called Council of Independent Colleges. It's the Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow Program that through a grant that the Hosking Center for Entrepreneurship and Initiative in Innovation. Wow. I just came back from class and I gave a test, so you have to give me my big grades. But it's through the grant that was written by Ron Griffith, who's the executive director of the center, and with some help from Linda Sharp, who is in the advancement area. We got a grant from the Bondman Foundation that fund this event. Mr. Anil Singh Polaris has been here for the whole week. Since Monday, he's been the visiting classes, has been going to the meetings, and yesterday we have the webinar which we recorded, and today we have a live audience, and we never know how many people showed up. So we put up some chairs and tables. It might be a round table of 10 people. It might be a full room of students, faculty, and staff. And I'm so excited to see you, because you're going to hear our speaker share from his heart and how the liberal arts education shaped him, and also the cross-cultural upbringing. I'm not going to steal his thunder, but her early discussion with our speaker, we're going to have a dialogue instead of putting him up here in the podium and speak for 45 minutes. He can do it, no problem. But he believes that the Socratic method of questioning, dialoguing is going to be more beneficial, especially for students who are going into business. And he sees the relationship between that method of inquiry and, well, through dialoguing, we're going to learn more. Anil, please take a seat. Well, Anil has a very long and successful career, and he had worked 10 years with a company in Seattle, Washington. A big company that begins with an M, not McDonald's, not Motorola. Can someone guess what the company is? Microsoft. Okay, it was between 1991 to 2003 that Anil worked there for 12 years, and working with a team of initially 40 translators and technologists, working on their releasing of the technical reports and whatnot, and manuals, and soon his boss, Bill Gates, was convinced that he should be given a much more important position. That's to manage all the international vendors, which is a big title and important position. And through all these years, Anil has moved up the ladder, so to speak, but he also has a passion for something different. He quit Microsoft. Why would someone quit working for Microsoft? And he turned into founding businesses of his own. He's an entrepreneur, as you can see from the title. He's a global entrepreneur. He's also a very giving person. He's founded and co-founded 2 nonprofit organizations, and we'll have Anil tell us a little bit about that. But to begin with, I'd like to ask for Anil to share a little bit about his cross-cultural upbringing, which some of you might have heard. Most of you might be the first time that you're hearing from Neil, and then we'll take it from there. And again, we're using the Socratic method, and so the microphone is going to be available for anybody who has a question. So be bold and ask your questions, and there are no dumb questions at all. Are we good? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? Thumbs up. Okay. Let's welcome Neil.
So I'll take a few minutes to talk a little bit about my biography, though it's boring me to tears by this point of the week. Begging all of your indulgence, for those of you who haven't heard my background, I'll take a few minutes to talk about that, and then Caleb and I will hopefully engage in a good Socratic dialogue with you. So I'm born and bred internationalist. I wish I could take credit for it, but I had nothing to do with it. My father's from India, my mother's from Spain. I was born in Holland. I was raised in India and England, and then in Belgium for the most part as a youngster. So I have Spanish as my mother tongue, I've got French as what I call my formal tongue, and English is my third language, which I learned when I came here 40 years ago. So by virtue of my upbringing, I experienced a lot of, I had to constantly fit in. So growing up in Brussels in the 1960s, I don't know how much many of you know about Belgium, but it's a highly segregated society. It's a very tribal society in which there are two warring camps now for hundreds of years. There's the Northerners, who are Dutch speakers, Flemish, and there's the Southerners, who are the Walloons, the French speakers. And in some senses, Belgium is an artificial country because half of it really does belong with the Dutch, and the southern half really does belong with France. But it meant that growing up in Belgium in the 1960s, we had segregated courtyards. And segregated in this country means one thing. Segregated in Belgium means something completely different, and it's segregated by language and by culture. Right? So you had a courtyard for the Flemish, and you had a courtyard right next door for the French speakers. And if your ball went, across the Flemish courtyard and you went running after it, they were going to spit you, they were going to hit you, they were going to try to trip you, they were going to try to hurt you. And that level of tension still exists to this day in Belgium, by the way. They've had a divided government, i.e. a non-functional government, for a number of years as a result of their inability to cross that cultural divide. So that's one of the first powerful experiences for me of how to navigate that. I should also say that this is no longer true today because Europe is a far more integrated society. But in the 60s and early 70s, there were 1,000 kids in my Jesuit school, and there was only 3 of us brown kids, and it was me and my 2 brothers. And so that created another dynamic, another tension. Also, as I said, my father is from India, my mother's from Spain, so we went to Spain, which we did every year for 3-4 months during the summer. I always faced the same questions of, where do you think you belong? Are you Spanish? Are you Indian? Are you Belgian? What are you? And those are confusing questions when you're a child, but they become much clearer as you get older. And so my answer now is I am a citizen of the world. I have no strong preference. I love all of the countries that I've visited. I've loved all of the cultural experiences that I've had the benefit of having growing up. And let me just add a little more about that before I open this up to questions. So I went from Brussels to New York City. I went to the United Nations International School in New York City, which is a breeding ground for the sons and daughters of diplomats and international civil servants. And so I went from, as I said, being one of 3 brown kids in the school of 1,000 white kids, and to, in my graduating class in 1980, there was 100 of us and over 50 nationalities represented. So I went from a very homogeneous to a very, very international culture. And that was a very interesting contrast for me. I went from a city, Brussels, that basically had these two warring culturally and linguistically factions, but it was otherwise homogeneous, to New York City, which those of you who have been there know. You walk down the street and you hear 15, 20 different languages spoken while you're walking. So a fantastic contrast. And so my upbringing is one thing, and then the way that I've applied those skills, and I continue to apply those skills, is what's made me particularly effective in a number of areas. So I joined Microsoft in 1991. I was managing a team of French and German translators. And pretty soon I was managing all of international vendor relations for Microsoft, which meant I controlled all of the teams worldwide. I had a Middle East group, I had a Europe group, I had an Africa group, and it meant a lot of travel, 60 to 70% travel for a few years, which is a terrible penalty on your family, on my spouse and my children. And it's not something, for those of you who travel extensively, there's nothing particularly sexy about it. After a while, you're just going from airport to airport, and conference room to conference room, and fine dinner to fine dinner until you basically say enough with the 8-course meals. Please just take me to the nearest McDonald's so I can enjoy myself. So I won't. That's by way of background. So a lot of it was a blessing and a benefit that I received from my parents and from my upbringing. But then applying it was really the key. I'm very much a liberal arts person. I have English and philosophy undergraduate degrees. I went to Harvard. I have a comparative religion degree from them, a master's degree. I was going to pursue a doctorate there, but didn't have the academic passion to continue for another 10 years. So I joined the world of business. I got married, I had a child, and decided that I needed to make some money to sustain my family, and so joined Microsoft, which was looking for, back then, for internationalists to help drive the company forward. When I joined Microsoft, 70% of our revenues were domestic, US, and only 30% international. Now, about 22 years later, the reverse is true. Over 70% of Microsoft's revenues are international, and a diminishing share is domestic. So, companies are going global. The world is becoming smaller and smaller. We've seen the rise of China from a very difficult place to live with lots of penalties associated with it to one of the most thriving economies in the world. You see the rise of India as well, from the same to a very thriving economy, at least for a subset of their population. So the world keeps getting smaller and smaller. And people who have the ability to navigate cross-culturally and to navigate with an unusual set of skills. As I said, I'm not a business person, but the skills I learned from philosophy and from literature and from theology and political science and all the passions that I had growing up has really served me very well, and I think it served you, all of you, very well. You may not have an international background by design the way I did, but that doesn't mean that you can't succeed internationally, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be encouraged to. One of the great benefits you have at the school is this requirement that you travel abroad, and this opportunity to travel abroad for 3 weeks or a semester, and now I'm hearing that some of you are taking maybe 2 semesters abroad and the 3 weeks on top. And for those of you considering that, I can't encourage you enough. It'll enrich you as a human being, but it will also maximize your economic potential. I was mentioning that at the United Nations, where both of my parents worked for most of their professional careers, for each language that you master, they boost your salary by $15,000 to $20,000 a year. And so a lot of UN folks spend the 30 years that they spend at the UN learning 5 or 6 languages and boosting their salaries accordingly. But that's just one example. Multinationals allow for the same thing. They're looking for people who are qualified. They're looking for people they can send at a moment's notice anywhere in the world. So with that, I think I covered some of the areas that are in the title. I've also, as I said, an entrepreneur over the last 10 years. I do international management consulting. I help companies large and small either refine their international approach or their international supply chain, or build strategies for going international by helping them analyze which markets to go into, which demographics to target, how to crunch the numbers that are going to give them compelling results, building budgets to take their services and products internationally. So that's basically my exposition. I hope I didn't go on too long.
All right, Anil, that's great. That's a good starting. I have a question, maybe a sidebar question. When you think, what language do you think in? When you dream, do you speak English or other languages?
That's a very good question, and actually the answer is very simple, and it's always been very striking to me. So if I end up in Spain for a couple of days, I start to read in Spanish.
Okay.
If I end up in France or in Quebec or a French-speaking country, within 2 or 3 days I start to dream in French. And so there's my subconscious kind of resets the language according to which culture, which nation I'm in.
It was a great remark about that you made that every language someone picks up, they increase their salary potential by $15,000-$20,000. As such, we have assigned sheets there for all languages. Anybody's interested? It is only 10 o'clock. It might be too early for jokes. Okay. Microsoft, in principle, Anil, would not hire anybody without the proper skills or preparation. They must have seen some great potential in you. And, well, I'm sure there was a good investment on the part. I'm going to flip the question, over the 12 years working with Microsoft, what do you gain personally and professionally that you can transfer to your new ventures?
Right, so the one skill that I didn't have in great abundance was business skills. I had run a company for 2 years before joining Microsoft, which is the reason they hired me. I was the director of the Boston Language Institute in Boston, Massachusetts. And, Microsoft, I like to say that I didn't go to a formal business school, but I went to the best business school in America, which at the time was Microsoft. It's an incredibly data-driven place. It's numbers and facts, and it's very data analysis, very data-driven. So I learned how to become a good business person at Microsoft, how to negotiate contracts, how to analyze profit and loss statements, how to figure out return on investment estimates, how to figure out which markets to go into first. And that was my job internally at Microsoft, is to work with all the business units to help them go international. Those skills, now combined with my liberal arts degree, my international expertise, and now my business skills, have led directly to my success over the last 10 years as a management consultant, as a company. We built teams of translators in Egypt, 25 translators full-time for 3 years for one of our clients. We've done work in Japan, we've done work in China, we've done work all over the world. And so that combination of skills has really helped.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll turn the microphone over to the audience. And the question is about do you consider yourself a leader? And if so, what kind of leader you are? Might be that we ask one of the colleagues, might be we ask about the family, what the leader you are, how you help us.
Yes, I do consider myself a leader. It's a difficult thing to be, and it's changed over the years dramatically. I was one kind of leader at Microsoft in my late 20s, and that was that was driven by the style and culture of the company. It was driven really from the top down by Bill Gates, who was a workaholic. Literally worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. He had no life but Microsoft, and so he kind of set the pace for the rest of us. And so that's one leadership style. He was also deeply confrontational, very, very aggressive, rude, intolerant, but at the same time brilliant and incisive and sharp and driven, determined. So those combination of skills it's interesting. It produces a leader that kind of bulldozes their way, or we all did, bulldoze our way through issues, through conflicts, without always having the necessary regard for the fact that we're all human beings and that that's the place that we operate. We're not machines. And corporate America very often reduces us to machines or sees us as machines. And one of my friends is one of the leaders at Starbucks, and he says that the key to success at Starbucks is they try to treat their salespeople, they try to treat all of their employees not as machines, but as human beings first and foremost. And it seems to work. I mean, I've heard plenty of criticism of Starbucks as well, but when you walk into one of Starbucks, you usually see friendly, smiling faces, employees who are happy to see you, who serve you with grace, who serve you with dignity, and you feel comfortable there. And so that's another kind of leadership. I've also, as you know, started a couple of nonprofits, and also using my business skills, but then married to what I like to call benefit rather than profit, and benefit for all. And compassion is a wonderful thing because it enriches the people who receive it as much as the person who's giving it. And I know that particularly in a Christian school, you can all appreciate what that means, that you help yourself by helping others. And that's another type of leader, right? Servant leaders. So lots of different types of leaders over time. I think my kids might sometimes call me a dictator. And sometimes,
my kids too.
And sometimes might go, that I really need you to give me some very frank and brutal advice, and I can do both of those. So it varies. Leadership varies, and my style as a leader is still evolving. I'm still learning.
Well, thank you, Emil. And the microphone is open for anybody to grab. Just raise your hand. I'll turn the microphone over to you, so that everyone can listen, can hear the question, and also we are doing the recording. And give your name too, please. Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Has your philosophy degree played into your favor at all?
Yes. Thank you. My philosophy degree is one of the most important degrees that I've earned from philosophy, and particularly from the Socratic dialogue. That's why I'm always promoting Socrates. I'm always promoting Plato. And these are not just books to read. These are ways to live. And the Greeks in particular, for that philosophy was a way to live, not an intellectual exercise. And so philosophy gave me the ability to analyze good arguments from bad ones, to make sound judgments, which is a rare skill, and it's a trainable skill. You can learn it. You can learn how to argue. You can learn, it's very important that you learn to argue both sides of the equation, not just automatically take one. But this is the great thing about debate clubs and rhetoric, and I don't know if you have a rhetoric teacher in the school, but if you don't, you should. And if you don't have a debate club, you should, because those are the kind of skills that really help you figure out what makes sense from what doesn't make sense. And you can analyze all sorts of arguments. Does God exist? Is this binary equation going to yield this kind of result or that kind of result, logic, whatever. And those are invaluable skills that I use every day. And particularly in the world of business, where, as I always say, common sense is the most uncommon thing of all. And so being able to use good judgment is helpful. And I got that from philosophy, but all of you can get that from any of the liberal arts that you are focusing on, and in particular, by combining, as I always say, by combining disparate kind of degrees. So if you're going for philosophy major, put a business minor, or if you're going for a business major, put a literature minor in there. And that combination gives you the ability to see the world from a very different perspective, and it's very useful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenna. You had said that you recommend people going abroad as much as they can. So what to an employer is, like, why is that so attractive to an employer, and what skills do you learn there that are really nice?
Sure. So the world, as I said, is getting smaller and smaller. We have increasingly interconnected world from a business and commerce standpoint. We have not just big American multinationals, not just big Chinese multinationals, Indian multinationals, of course European multinationals. And so the ability to navigate across the globe has become even more important than it's ever been, I would argue. And so people who have the ability to cross cultural borders, who have some familiarity with how people think in other cultures, with different cultural mores, different cultural attitudes, and who can quickly and effectively navigate through them, are very valuable. Just think about it. If you have to send somebody to China, you're a big, Detroit-based firm, maybe a supplier of auto parts, and you want to go and set up a manufacturing plant somewhere in China to manufacture your parts. Which would you rather send? Someone who doesn't speak a word of Mandarin, who has shown no real interest in Chinese culture, food, history. And a lot of American companies used to do that. They would send, say, English is the international language of business, and so, we expect, and we're going to set up a manufacturing plant out there, so they should speak English. Well, they don't, right? Even though they're trying. By the way, English language is compulsory for all Chinese from grade 1 onwards today in China. Think about that. Compulsory, right? So they're placing, even the Chinese are placing a lot of stock in multicultural awareness and the ability to cross borders. Or you send someone who may not speak fluent Mandarin, may not speak fluent Cantonese, but has taken the time to learn about Chinese history, to learn about Chinese culture, to learn some words of Mandarin, even hello, goodbye, how are you, and who has intellectual curiosity. And as soon as you go with that attitude, your Chinese counterparts become very welcome, because you're being respectful of their culture. And everybody wants respect, right? Everybody wants to be understood, and everybody wants to be respected. And so if you approach it that way, you're much more valuable to any company, because it makes the path, it's the path of least resistance gets created. So they're very important skills that I really encourage you.
Thank you. But this is Janet is an international business major. She came back from a summer program in Japan, and she's planning to go to China in spring. So that question was somewhat loaded.
My name is Daryl, and I was just wondering, what is your view on globalization, and where do you see that going in the next 10 or 15 years?
Well, I think globalization is inevitable. I think globalization has its positive and its negative sides. I think what we see in great part with the crash of 2008 was the negative side of globalization, where you basically rush to the country with the lower labor costs and you shift the world economy. I don't know how many of you know this, but when you walk into a Walmart, if any of you do, 85% of the products that are sold there are made in China. 85%. And so the reason for that is that labor in China is very cheap. It's much cheaper than it is in the United States. So the downside of that is that it's created a hemorrhage of manufacturing jobs from the US, from other industrialized countries, to places like China, to places like India, Vietnam, Thailand, and many other countries like that, where the jobs are. Now, the counterpart of that is if you get a job even in China, where there are still pretty horrendous labor conditions in many factories, but where if you watch the documentaries that have been produced, the workers at those factories are so grateful to have a job and are so grateful to make a living that they will work the 14-hour shifts if they have to, and they will work them 7 days a week, and they will sleep on the factory floor because the alternative is so much worse. And so, you know, you could argue those are horrendous labor conditions, but it's still an improvement for the economic lot of all of those people. So I think that, you know, so a lot of downsides and upsides, but I think the world is getting smaller and smaller. And so, as we know, you know, if we default on our debt next week, the country that's complaining the most and increasingly loudly is China, because they own $1.4 trillion of our debt, and they invested that money in this country because of the stability, the eternal stability of the U.S. system. The U.S. has never defaulted on its debt in 236 years, ever. And so I hope that next week won't be the first time. And I actually believe it won't be. But whatever you think about its impact, negative or positive, it's inevitable. It's not going away. And so there's a new world, there's a new set of rules. The world will keep getting smaller and smaller and more economically interdependent than it is already, which is quite a lot. Right? China can't make a move without us. You know, they sneeze, we catch a cold. We sneeze, they catch a cold. So we are more and more interdependent economically, and so globalization is not good.
Thank you, Neil. Well, on our title, we talk about leveraging the liberal arts education and cross-cultural skills for a successful career. Well, this is kind of the bait that we use to bring people in here. But if you are in chapel on Monday, our speaker talked about the success to significance. And well, at the peak of your career at Microsoft, you are probably in your late 30s, maybe early 40s,
Yep.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And well, you chose not to stay. Had you stayed in Microsoft, well, you continue to be very successful. But I think, well, you have alluded to the fact, well, there's a price to pay.
Yes.
Can you comment on the difference between success and significant?
Yeah, and I was very, thank you for that question, Caleb. I was very struck, and I caught the last 20 minutes of the chapel service on Monday, but you had a speaker from Washington, D.C., some kind of greedy personality, and I apologize, I don't know him, I don't know his name. But he was talking about success as what you do professionally, right? Your professional achievements, which in our society is basically tied to material success, how much money you make, how many homes or how big your house is, how flashy your car is, how, you know, can you send your kids to trips abroad, can you send them to fancy private schools. And that's one measure of success, but I would argue it's the most tenuous measure of success, because I have seen so many of my peers at Microsoft make tens of millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars, and the price they paid is they're divorced, so their kids can't stand them. They are alone in their great big, 10,000 square foot mansions with their 4 or 5 sports cars and their sailboat, and they're miserable human beings. They're miserable human beings, and very unhappy, deeply unhappy. And so I have 6 kids, and I, being a very staunch proponent of liberal arts, I said to my kids, you do whatever makes you happy. And if that's music, if that's theater, if you want to be a janitor, none of them have taken me up on that one. But whatever makes you happy is what you should do. Because being happy is what's important. It's also a very consistent value from the Greeks, the pursuit of happiness, right? It's written into our Constitution by Thomas Jefferson, who was a big fan of the ancient Greeks as well. That's why we always talk about the pursuit of happiness. And that's far more important. And that goes to significance, as Dr. Chaplin was mentioning. And is it more important? What is more important in life? I always say that when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking, oh wow, I really gave it good to Borland, back in 1995. You're going to be thinking, where are my kids? Where are my grandkids? Where's my family? Where's my partner? Where are the human beings that make my life meaningful? And that's significance. In a Christian school, You obviously have your faith to anchor you in terms of significance, your relationship to God, your relationship to the universe. And those things you can hold on to forever. Material possessions, and that's a complete illusion, because in this world you never own anything anyway, right? We're just renting at the end of the day. We come here and we pass away, and so nothing really belongs to you, quote unquote. So if you adopt that posture, you can move your life towards significance. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with material success, and if you can be happy and be successful, you know, better for you, better for the people around you. But you know, which would you rather be, poor and happy, or rich and unhappy?
Maybe one great illustration is what Bill Gates, he's giving away 95% of his wealth. And can you comment on whether he's happier now than before he owned every single dime?
Bill Gates is a very interesting case study, because he was, when he was younger, so driven, so motivated to succeed, and now we're using success as, in his case, you know, world domination and, you know, crushing the competition and being number one. He was very, very driven to be the best, to be the boldest, to be the brightest, and I think he achieved a lot of that way. But you know, the Bill Gates of those years, and I was around him to some measure, was just this incredibly obsessive, compulsive, you know, individual. Just go, 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 go all the time. Never sat down. Never really kind of thought of it. He was always action oriented. And after he met Melinda Gates now, and I had 3 kids. They now have 3 kids, and he had a lot less to prove. His undergone a fantastic transformation. He's now very exclusively focused on his foundation, and doing big things with it, like eradicating polio and finding a cure for HIV/AIDS. You know, doing all sorts of fantastic things for the betterment of mankind, if you will, than he did before. And it also shows that, you know, we don't need to necessarily be one thing all our lives, that you can actually grow, evolve, and transform yourself constantly. And he's a very good case study of that.
So speaking of transforming yourself, my name's Daniel, by the way. Speaking of transforming yourself, what languages, what ways do you suggest to learn languages? And also, how did you learn languages along the way?
The only good way, and I'm not sure if we have any language professors in the room today, but the most effective way, I won't say the only way, the most effective way to learn a language is to live in a country or an environment where it's spoken, and where you're forced to use it every day. And so that's why your travel abroad programs here are such a fantastic opportunity. It's very, very hard to learn language outside of this context. It's very, very difficult to learn language in a classroom, where as soon as you walk out the door, you revert back to English. So go and travel abroad, go and live abroad. If I could encourage all of you, and especially, you know, before you get attached, before you get married, before you have children, then it becomes much more difficult to travel. But before you do all of those things, you know, go live in China or India or, you know, Africa or whatever, wherever you feel moved and compelled to. That's the way to learn language. That's the way I learn languages also. You know, I did learn Spanish from even while growing up in Holland and England and India and Belgium. But I had a big advantage. My mother was a Spanish teacher, and so she was relentless with us. There was no excuse. You know, Spanish was the only language that she would accept from us, and so we learned it that way. That's kind of the hard way. We did spend 3 months out of the year every year in Spain, so that gave us a good context. But no, you have to ideally go and live abroad and immerse yourself.
Okay, and then my third question was, which skills were most important for you to learn along the way?
Yeah, and I think I've answered that question already. I think it's really about sound judgment and you know, just using your common sense, because very often we overcomplicate things and we make them far more difficult than they need to be when the answer is pretty obvious. And so that doesn't mean simplicity. There can be a great deal of complexity of thought behind it, but the answers are usually pretty straightforward. So I would say, good analysis skills and good judgment skills.
That's great. We got a question here and there. Next.
Morning, Neil. My name is Eric Bega, and I'm mostly responsible for diversity activities on campus. So certainly appreciate your you sharing your background. I think you and I can maybe chat later in French.
Ça sera un plaisir.
I actually had a couple questions here. My first question is why did you leave a successful job to seek out entrepreneurship versus going to another successful company?
So, by the time I left, I had been at Microsoft 12 years, which is probably the equivalent of 30 years at a normal company. And we had an average tenure of 4.5 years in the 90s. That's how long most employees lasted. And that corresponded to the time that it took for your stock options to vest fully, and you'd cash out and you'd leave. And so I'd lasted a lot longer than that, but I was very burned out. I was very tired. I had been pigeonholed. I was Mr. International at Microsoft, which was great in the early days, but I wanted to do other things. I wanted to do sales and marketing. I wanted to explore advertising. And my bosses said, you do whatever you want to do. You work from home as many days as you want, but you are Mr. International, and that's what you're going to do. And so there was that dynamic. There was also the toll on me emotionally, but also on my family, quite frankly. And so I took a year off after I left Microsoft to be a house husband, to take my kids to school, to join the PTA, to cook, to clean the house, to do all of those things. And it was a tremendous opportunity for me. It's a really a wonderful opportunity that you don't get again to spend time with your kids. So those are the reasons why I left.
Thank you. And the other question is, maybe I guess you could have covered that question, but just out of curiosity, I mean, a lot of the students here and just different, I guess, universities, they don't really teach you, especially as an undergraduate student, how to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So when did you recognize, during your, I guess, your 1 year sabbatical,
Yes.
that, entrepreneurship is what I want to do and I'm ready for it?
Well, I recognize that as walking out the door at Microsoft. I joined a company that had 7,000 employees. I left a company that had 80,000 employees. I joined Bill Gates' Microsoft, and I left Steve Ballmer's Microsoft. Those were two very, very different dynamics. The early Microsoft was very entrepreneurial. It didn't matter what level of the company you were. If you had a good idea, I could percolate to the top. I'm proof of that. And by the time I left, there was a lot more necessary bureaucracy, levels of review, levels of audit, levels of management, and it becomes much more bureaucratic. Now, some people are very comfortable with that. I wasn't. I'm more, I thrive on kind of creative challenges and finding quick solutions and being nimble. And by the time I left, at least in my opinion, Microsoft had lost a lot of that nimbleness and that flexibility. So I had also, because of the nature of my role, I was growing and developing entrepreneurs all over the world who were building their companies from scratch, which is the way we like them to do it, so that they can be customized to our needs as a company. And so I had a lot of experience with dealing with entrepreneurs and with seeing their companies grow from 100,000 to 10 million, and then from 10 million to 50 million, and then from 50 million to $100 million, and the changes that requires at each step, because you can't run a $100 million company the same way that you run a $1 million company. It requires different skills. And so I thought I had a lot of entrepreneurial expertise, and I figured, okay, now I'm going to be a master of my own destiny. And being an entrepreneur is harder than most people think. And the upside is you do have control of your destiny. you make people subject to your politics as opposed to you being subject to theirs. And so the upside is you control your destiny. The downside is if you fall flat on your face, there's nobody there to pick you up. If you make a critical mistake, your company goes under. So those are big contrasts with the corporate world. But I really did want that flexibility, that creativity, and the ability to control my own destiny. Okay. Yeah.
I'm Matt, and as you, I think one of the advantages of liberal arts education is you're not just gaining a skill, but you're also gaining characteristics and traits that will help you down the road. So through your travels and your experience abroad, you've already talked about some of those skills that are transferable, you know, problem solving and decision making, things like that. But what are some skills or characteristics or traits that different parts of the world value more than other parts?
Well, I mean, I think the general trait that I haven't spoken about, which is probably just as important as the one that I mentioned earlier, is empathy, right? And that's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, the ability to feel or appreciate the world from their perspective intimately. And you know, people don't see the world the same way, right? If we're in for the most part, in a Judeo-Christian country here. And so that gives us a certain way of looking at the world, a certain morality, a certain sense of ethics, that if you go to places like India and China, is not the way they look at the world. They have a different set of values, they have a different cultural context, history, and so the way we see things is not the way they see things. And in order to be able to cross that bridge, you have to be able to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, from my perspective, you know, Japan is a Buddhist country, 98% Buddhist or 97% Buddhist. And that means a lot to them, right? Their Buddhist background, the impact on their culture. And if you appreciate that, if you have empathy and understanding, that can make you very, very effective. So and I hope I'm answering your question, I would say, practice being someone else, practice being a different kind of person, and do it very deliberately. And if you do that, when you sit down with them, they'll be able to say, oh, yes, if you're in Japan, please let me serve you your drink, because you may know or not know, but you never serve yourself a drink in Japan. It's considered immensely impolite, right? Because you're emphasizing yourself over others, and you don't do that in Japan. So you always serve everybody else. And simple things like that. And that's cultural awareness. It's empathy. It's understanding. And you can get that from literature.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, my name's Josh. You talked a little bit about your experience at Microsoft and how the culture there for the company was very entrepreneurial and almost in a bad way, workaholism. How, as someone who wants to be attached to a bigger company someday, how do I find out the culture of the company? How do I initiate myself into it and find out which company I would want to be?
And you're a business major, right?
Marketing.
Marketing. That's where your teachers can help you tremendously. There's all sorts. You can do case studies analysis. You can read periodicals like Harvard Business Review. I am a compulsive news junkie. I spend 2 hours every day reading the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Huffington Post, Fox News, Christian Science Monitor, everything I get my hands on, El País, Le Monde, just to get a good, well-rounded perspective on what's going on in the world. So a lot of that information is freely available. You can study, you can go to places like Glassdoor, Glassdoor.com, where they have reviews of all these companies and the employees, either both existing and former employees, describing their experiences, both positive and negative, about the companies they work for. There's rankings. All that information is publicly available, or a lot of it is. And your business professors, your your mentors here in the school can help you get that information. It's not very hard to get.
Anybody, a final question? Well, Anil, you have exceeded our expectations.
Okay.
We didn't know what to expect. Like I said earlier on, we could have 5 people, we could have 50, we could have 100, and but I really appreciate you coming and help us with think outside the box. Don't you think so? And he had done it very successfully. Let's thank